Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we have synthesized a mountain of high-level reports, some confidential meeting transcripts, and a lot of geopolitical analyses.
A huge amount of material.
And it all points toward, well, one conclusion. We are rapidly heading into a period of profound global instability.
Yeah, unlike anything we've seen since maybe the Cold War.
And this isn't about isolated incidents. We're not talking about small, localized problems.
No, not at all. We're staring down the barrel of converging crises. You have economic, financial, and geopolitical forces all accelerating toward this critical inflection point in 2026.
Our focus today is on the systems themselves, the systems that underpin global power and, how they seem to be breaking down all at the same time.
That's the core realization. Our mission really is to cut through the noise for you. We want to connect these massive, seemingly disparate forces.
Right.
We are linking the panic that's happening in, the most protected financial institutions in the West.
The secret discussions among central bankers in Basel.
Exactly. We're linking that to the strategic calculus of powers like China and Iran and the very real industrial collapse that's underway across Europe.
So if you're watching the world shift, this deep dive will show you exactly how these forces interact.
And how they dictate both your immediate financial future and, well, the long-term geopolitical landscape. It's all connected.
And before we get into the mechanics of it all, we really need to internalize the level of perceived desperation from those tasked with managing the whole system.
It's palpable in the material.
To set the stage, let's start with what was, for me, the most chilling revelation we found. We have accounts from financial leaders, the people responsible for maintaining stability, who are admitting in private that they are now basically praying nothing goes wrong while we prepare emergency measures.
That specific phrase, praying nothing goes wrong, it's staggering.
It is.
Coming from the people who are supposed to ensure the stability of a multi-trillion-dollar system, it's a perfect definition of our current deeply fragile moment.
It signals the end of proactive control, doesn't it?
It does. It's the start of reactive mitigation. It's an acknowledgement that the global financial system is just so over-leveraged, so brittle, that any shock.
Any shock at all.
Right. Whether it's an unexpected geopolitical conflict, a failed treasury auction, or a major country just announcing full de-dollarization, any of those things could be the trigger for an acute systemic crisis.
So the risk is no longer theoretical.
No. It's an immediate operational threat, and they know it.
Okay, let's unpack this structural vulnerability. We need to start where the fragility is most apparent, the cracks in the Western financial foundation itself.
Specifically, the quiet panic among central banks and this looming pension crisis.
Yes. Let's start with the panic in Basel. The coordination we're seeing among Western central banks, especially with the European Central Bank, it goes far beyond standard risk management.
Oh, way beyond. They are actively pre-positioning contingency tools. Serious ones.
So for listeners who might not track the intricacies of global financial plumbing, what specific tools are being prepared and why are they so alarming?
The tools being pre-positioned suggest they anticipate a rapid-fire acute liquidity shock.
A sudden loss of faith in the dollar.
A sudden loss of faith or just the ability to access it. The material specifically references potential limitations on dollar-euro swap agreements.
And restrictions on currency conversion.
Right. And to understand the gravity of that, you have to understand what a dollar-euro swap line even is.
So break that down for us. What is that essential emergency oxygen?
Dollar swap lines are they're basically emergency liquidity lifelines. It's the plumbing. So when a bank in Germany or France needs U.S. dollars to pay a debt, and they always need dollars, they borrow them from the ECB.
Okay.
Who in turn borrows them from the U.S. Federal Reserve via these swap lines. It's the mechanism that ensures the global banking system, never runs out of the world's most crucial reserve currency.
And they were preparing to limit them.
Preparing to limit them. That signals two things. First, that central banks anticipate such a massive dollar liquidity squeeze that even these emergency lines might not be enough.
And second?
Second, that they are preparing to ration access to the dollar across the Western financial sphere just to prevent a total meltdown. It's a crisis playbook for dollar scarcity.
And the coordination between the ECB and the Fed, that just underscores the shared realization that a crisis in dollar liquidity will instantly become a crisis for the euro.
Instantly. It's a contagion they can't stop.
This preparation for a liquidity event, it links directly to the financial time bomb ticking right here at home. the pension time bomb.
Uh-huh.
The calculations being made behind closed doors about the risk to retirement accounts are, frankly, staggering. They calculate a risk of $3 to $5 trillion in pension losses.
And this isn't from some black swan event like a massive stock market crash?
No, just if interest rates rise another 200 basis points, another 2%.
Let's just sit with that number for a moment. $3 to $5 trillion. That represents the fundamental promise of retirement for an entire generation of workers.
All of it at risk.
All of it at risk from a relatively minor shift in interest rates. And the reason this exposure is so immense lies in the financial strategy used by so many large pension funds, public and private.
Liability-driven investing, or LDI.
Exactly, LDI.
I think we need to understand the mechanism here. How does a 2% rate hike cause a multi-trillion-dollar hole?
Yeah.
It sounds almost unbelievable.
It's a balance sheet problem created by debt and leverage. Pension funds, they're required to match their long-term future liabilities.
Yeah, the money they owe retirees in 20 or 30 years.
Right. They have to match that with current assets. So to maximize returns, especially when rates were near zero, many of them engaged in these sophisticated LDI strategies.
And that means using a lot of leverage and derivatives.
A ton of it, often involving long-duration government bonds, like U.S. Treasuries. When interest rates were basically zero, the price of those bonds was very, very high.
But when the Fed started hiking rates,
the value of those existing long-duration bonds just plummeted dramatically.
So the value of the assets they hold decreases rapidly, but their liabilities, what they owe retirees, that stays the same.
Precisely. And because so many used derivatives and leverage to enhance returns, when the underlying bond value dropped, it triggered immediate, massive collateral calls.
Which means they have to sell other things.
They're forced to sell other assets at fire sale prices just to cover those collateral requirements, which then further depresses asset prices globally and deepens the hole in their funding status. It's a vicious cycle.
And the admission from officials that they have no policy tools to prevent it, that means the crisis is structural, right?
It's completely structural. They cannot print money to fix the valuation issue without just accelerating inflation.
Right.
And they can't lower rates significantly without reigniting that same inflation all over again.
So they are trapped.
They are truly trapped by the consequences of, what, a decade? More?
Yeah.
Decades of zero interest rate policies.
That structural trap creates an impossible political dilemma. When retirement accounts craters across the country, the political pressure for bailouts, a $5 trillion bailout, it will be immense.
Of course it will. It would be political suicide not to act. But if they try to bail out the pensions, they worry they can't print our way out without accelerating inflation and devaluation.
That's the tightrope walk.
It is. Printing money solves the liquidity problem, but it just destroys the currency, which worsens the crisis.
But allowing mass retirement failure solves the currency problem, but causes catastrophic political and social upheaval.
Exactly. The entire system is so over-leveraged that its primary mechanisms for self-correction, raising rates, or printing money now directly lead to systemic self-destruction.
It just demonstrates the profound fragility at the heart of the whole Western financial architecture.
It really does.
And this financial fragility, it's directly intertwined with the accelerating decline of dollar dominance, what we often call the petrodollar system.
It is, and the analysis we looked at points directly to one event as the catalyst that changed the global calculus.
The freezing of Russia's assets.
The freezing of Russia's $300 billion in foreign exchange assets? Yes. This single act was the defining geopolitical moment of this decade.
It taught every country outside the Western alliance a critical lesson.
A very painful lesson.
Yeah.
That the U.S.-led financial system is not neutral. It is fully 100% weaponized. It was a unilateral, extrajudicial seizure that signaled to the world that if you cross Washington, your sovereign assets are not safe.
And that lesson resonated globally, didn't it? Countries with significant dollar holdings, especially in the Middle East, Asia, Latin America, they immediately asked themselves, are we next?
If we disagree with Washington on human rights or on oil production levels or their policy in the Middle East, can they simply switch off our access to our own wealth?
And the conclusion they drew was a resounding no.
A resounding no. They cannot live with that risk. And this initiated a silent, sustained move to de-risk.
So central banks and sovereign wealth funds started to quietly exit through hidden channels.
Yes, diversifying their holdings, reducing their exposure to U.S. Treasuries, and stockpiling gold at an absolutely unprecedented rate. This is the quiet financial war being fought right now.
And the U.S. fired the opening shot itself by weaponizing its currency.
They really did. But the truly irreversible structural blow to the petrodollar system is identified as Saudi Arabia joining the BRICS bloc.
It's called the death certificate for the petrodollar in some of these reports. That's an incredibly strong assertion.
It is, but it's mathematically sound. You have to remember the history. The petrodollar was established in the 1970s based on one simple premise.
That oil would only be sold in dollars.
Exactly. The world's largest oil producers, led by Saudi Arabia, would only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. This created a massive, constant, automatic global demand for dollars.
Forcing every country to hold dollar reserves and buy U.S. Treasury bonds.
Right. And that system, that automatic demand, is what allowed the U.S. to run trillion-dollar deficits without consequences for decades. It was a free lunch.
So how does BRICS membership change that mechanical requirement for dollars?
Well, now, BRICS countries, which includes major energy consumers like China and India, and major producers like Russia and now Saudi Arabia, they can purchase Saudi oil using yuan, rubles, rupees.
Or through bilateral currency swap agreements.
Precisely. This instantaneously ends the automatic demand for dollars for, at least 25% of global energy purchases, and potentially much more.
And Saudi Arabia's massive sovereign wealth fund, which is currently pegged so heavily to the dollar,
is now aligning with alternative financial structures. It's just accelerating the flow of capital away from the West.
So we're watching this shift play out in real time. What does the data suggest about the timeline and the consequences for the U.S. economy?
The analysts project that within, say, 18 to 24 months, 25 to 30% of global oil trade could settle outside the dollar.
And if you include the full scope of BRICS expansion and their trade corridors, that could reach
40, maybe 50%, very quickly. The crucial consequence here is a cascade effect that circles right back to our initial discussion on financial fragility.
That cascade being
What? If countries no longer need dollars for energy, they need fewer dollar reserves.
so they start selling off their dollar assets.
Primarily U.S. Treasury bonds. And when demand for U.S. Treasury bonds falls, the price of the bond drops, which means the interest rate, the yield that the U.S. must pay to borrow, rises significantly.
And that creates immediate, unavoidable economic pain for you, the listener.
Yes. It means everything from government borrowing to your mortgage, your credit cards, your business loans. It all becomes exponentially more expensive in the United States.
So the free lunch of running massive deficits without consequence is rapidly ending.
It's over. And the U.S. will soon have to pay market rates for its borrowing. And those are rates that the current fiscal situation simply cannot support without severe domestic cuts or hyperinflation.
So while the dollar system is weakening structurally from within, China is actively building the replacement financial infrastructure.
That's right.
Their strategy centers on the digital yuan, the ERMB. What core problem does a digital currency solve for the many countries trying to live and trade outside the dollar system?
It solves the problem of total American oversight and surveillance. That's the key.
Explain that.
Historically, any major transaction involving the dollar, even if it's between two non-American countries, has to clear through the U.S. financial system, usually using the SWIFT network.
And that gives the U.S. the ability to see the transactional data, the paper trail.
And impose sanctions or freeze funds at will. The digital yuan is explicitly designed to remove this paper trail.
So essentially for the listener, this means the U.S. loses its ability to see the transactional data and weaponize the transaction itself. Is that the core mechanism?
That is the core mechanism. It turns every transaction into a black box that bypasses American oversight completely. It is designed from the ground up to be sanction-proof.
So if trade is conducted entirely in digital RMB and the clearinghouse is outside U.S. jurisdiction,
dollar sanctions become meaningless for those participants. This is a foundational step in creating an independent, non-Western economic sphere.
But it's not just a technological or a surveillance play. China is making the digital RMB financially attractive. The material noted they are actively encouraging the shift by offering interest on digital RMB balances.
Which is an almost irresistible incentive for trade partners.
It seems like it.
It's an ingenious, coordinated move. It's designed to exert financial gravity. I mean, look at the alternatives. For years, holding dollars or dollar reserves meant accepting massive debt risk and getting zero interest returns.
You were holding a falling asset that paid you nothing.
Exactly. Now you have the RMB, which has already been strengthening against the dollar for over a year, and China is actively offering you a return on your balances.
And Wall Street banks like Goldman Sachs are viewing the RMB as significantly undervalued.
Suggesting a potential 25% appreciation. So, why would a country hold a zero-yielding, politically weaponized dollar when they could hold a strengthening RMB that pays them interest?
The choice becomes obvious.
It becomes a commercially self-interested decision.
And crucially, this isn't just some pilot program. They are systematically building the international plumbing to support this global shift.
Absolutely. The structural groundwork is extensive. China has established 2 dedicated pieces of infrastructure: a robust cross-border digital payment platform and a platform for digital assets. Think RMB bonds.
So the strategy is transparent.
And focused on creating an entire ecosystem. They encourage trading partners to transact in digital RMB, and then, to incentivize them further, they provide easy access to investment vehicles like Chinese government and corporate bonds.
It's a whole closed-loop system.
This entire setup, the digital currency, the interest incentive, the investment access, is building the economic infrastructure for the next 50 years of global trade. It's accelerating the peaceful transfer of global economic power away from the dollar system.
Okay, now we need to turn to Europe, where these financial and geopolitical crises converge in a particularly painful way. The analysis is just crystal clear. The deindustrialization of Germany is stripping Europe of its economic anchor.
And it all stems from a fateful strategic decision made back in 2022.
Right. Germany was the industrial engine of Europe, built on a very specific and non-replicable foundation.
Cheap, reliable Russian pipeline natural gas. It supplied 55% of its energy needs. This abundance of cheap energy was the key competitive advantage for any industry requiring massive energy input.
Nickels manufacturing.
Everything. So when European leaders chose to align fully with the U.S. sanctions regime, a decision rooted, in moral solidarity but lacking any real economic foresight, they made a self-inflicted wound.
It amounted to economic suicide.
It really did. They willingly sacrificed the foundation of their prosperity.
And the consequences are catastrophic because they are structural, not just cyclical. We're seeing Germany's core industries, chemicals, automotive, specialized steel, just hemorrhaging competitiveness.
Because their energy costs are now permanently double or triple what their competitors pay in the U.S. or the Middle East.
And this is more than just a cost of doing business increase, isn't it?
Oh, much more. I mean, key chemical processes like the Haber-Bosch process for fertilizer production, they are entirely dependent on cheap gas. The margin just disappears when the cost of gas triples.
These factories aren't just pausing production.
No, the projections tragically suggest Germany could lose 20 to 30% of its industrial base this decade. This isn't a recession they will rebound from. This is a true, permanent, structural deindustrialization.
They're relocating.
They're relocating to places like the U.S. or the Middle East where energy is subsidized or just fundamentally cheaper. And this migration fundamentally weakens the entire Eurozone project.
There's a cruel irony here, too, in the geopolitical consequences of this economic self-harm. The policy of freezing $105 billion in Russian assets, which was supposed to cripple the Kremlin,
it failed to stop Russia's economy from showing resilience. Instead, it only reinforced the lesson for other nations.
It served as a massive public lesson in what not to do.
Exactly. The West inflicted far more economic damage on itself, specifically on its German industrial core, than it inflicted on Russia. Russia just pivoted their trade corridors and found new buyers for its energy.
So this failure, combined with the successful weaponization of the dollar,
it taught the Global South that aligning too closely with Western security priorities can come at the cost of your national prosperity and your entire industrial base.
in this internal economic collapse, it inevitably leads to intense political fracturing within Europe. The analysis suggests that European political elites are now forced to maintain this intense anti-Russian hostility.
Just to justify the severe cuts to social spending that the economic downturn requires.
So the maintenance of an external enemy narrative, the Russian menace.
It becomes a necessary political tool. Leaders like Francis Macron or Germany's Merz, they have to constantly re-legitimize the intense structural economic pain their populations are feeling.
By framing it as a necessary defense of Western values against some existential threat.
Right. They are forced to maintain high hostility just to retain power, even as their citizens suffer rising energy poverty and social program cuts.
And this sets up a catastrophic political conflict, doesn't it, between the shrinking government and the rising demand for social welfare programs.
A social contract the European population has come to rely on as a core part of their society.
What's truly fascinating, though, is the stated geopolitical calculus from the United States regarding this European instability. The U.S. national security strategy explicitly stated an intent to cultivate movements in Europe that opposed Europe's current direction.
That is a clear written indication of a significant shift in U.S. strategy. It's not about promoting unity.
It sounds like promoting fragmentation.
It suggests an active strategic effort by the U.S. security establishment to support sovereigntist movements.
So political forces favoring national autonomy over Brussels.
Exactly. Over deep integration into the established EU and NATO architecture. The U.S. is essentially hedging its bets. It's preparing for a world where the unified EU might collapse, or where the NATO alliance structure is no longer manageable or reliable.
This is the U.S. preparing to actively accelerate the disintegration of the post-World War II global order it helped create.
It appears that way.
And we have a powerful symbolic signal of this diminished American leverage coming from its closest, most economically integrated neighbor, Canada.
Yes, the World Cup hosting rights.
The refusal by Canada to hand over World Cup hosting rights to the U.S. It seems like a trivial matter, but it's cited as a profound signal. Why does this anecdote matter so much?
It matters because Canada is 75% economically integrated with the U.S. They are the most compliant, most tied-in ally you could imagine.
And yet their decision to defy a high-level American request on something as simple as a sporting event is a huge signal.
Their calculation has fundamentally changed. They've observed the U.S. weaponize the financial system, they've seen the U.S. destabilize its own allies in Europe, and they've concluded that American reliability and consistency are no longer guaranteed.
So they understand there are now viable alternatives.
Deeper trade with Asia, alternative financial structures. It means the threat of American retaliation is diminished. The fact that Canada could look at an American presidential request and say no without triggering severe economic or political retaliation.
It demonstrates that American leverage has diminished globally.
To the point where defiance is becoming a viable foreign policy option, even for the most compliant allies. It's a psychological shift, but it's built on all the economic and financial cracks we've been discussing.
Okay, let's pivot to the hotspots where this collapsing leverage could lead to direct military confrontation. First, the Middle East, specifically Iran and Israel. The analysis points to a significant risk of escalation, particularly in the first quarter of 2026, with Israel continuing what is described as a maximalist provocation strategy.
A more cowbell strategy is another phrase used.
Right. Seeking a pretext for new strikes.
This prediction of high-risk escalation is based on the deep internal political pressures facing the current Israeli government. A massive foreign conflict is often used to energize public support, consolidate power, and, distract from internal political failures.
And the strategy relies on pushing boundaries to the limit.
To generate the required external intervention, or just the pretext for a large-scale strike on Iran's nuclear or missile infrastructure.
But the analysis strongly suggests that Iran is in a significantly different and militarily stronger position than in previous years. How exactly has Iran enhanced its position to withstand a major strike?
Iran is operating with a clear mandate from its leadership. They believe they are in an all-out war with the West, but they also believe they are militarily stronger now than ever before.
And this strength comes from where?
Two primary channels. First, substantial military support from strategic partners like Russia,
Which includes advanced air defense systems.
high-level platforms like the S-400 and advanced fighter jets. Second, they have exponentially improved their domestic missile and drone manufacturing capabilities.
And high-level defense meetings with Russia are ensuring integrated strategic planning.
Right. They've moved past simply using proxies. They have dramatically enhanced their conventional defense capabilities.
The analysis warns that if Israel strikes, Iran possesses a missile capability that will devastate Israel this time.
It describes Israel as living in a delusional cocoon and being overstretched.
Can you elaborate on that concept, the delusional cocoon?
The delusional cocoon refers to the assumption that previous military dominance still holds true today. Israel is currently engaged in multiple conflicts, in Gaza against Hezbollah in the north, managing internal political fragmentation.
Its military and logistical resources are overstretched.
Exactly. The key failure is underestimating Iran's upgraded missile and drone capabilities. If Iran were to respond to a major strike, their precision and the sheer volume of fire could genuinely overwhelm Israeli air defenses.
Leading to devastation on a scale never before experienced.
And that means the risk calculation for Tel Aviv has dramatically and structurally changed.
What's crucial here, though, is the requirement for U.S. involvement. The analysis indicates that any major Israeli operation requires U.S. logistical and material support.
Absolutely. Israel does not have the unrefueled range, nor the massive stores of precision munitions needed for a sustained major operation deep into Iran.
So any large-scale bombing campaign needs U.S. support.
It requires U.S. logistical and material support, specifically massive munitions, resupplies, refueling tankers, and high-level intelligence sharing.
Which means the U.S. is intimately tied to any potential escalation. It can't realistically claim neutrality.
No. And the current situation places the U.S. in a strategic trap. Refuse support and risk alienating a key ally, or provide support and risk being drawn into a wider, catastrophic regional war.
And let's look at the Western Hemisphere. The analysis highlights continued military actions in Venezuela, including extrajudicial killings, boat strikes, authorized CIA operations, all primarily aimed at regime change, despite the official rhetoric about fighting narcotics.
That rhetorical cover, the narcotics control narrative, it's very misleading. Venezuela is not the primary origin point for U.S.-bound drugs. Those often originate elsewhere in Latin America.
So these sustained military and paramilitary efforts, including those authorized for the CIA's Special Activities Division.
Like striking port facilities, these are unambiguously aimed at destabilizing and removing the Maduro government.
And yet these operations are viewed as a wasted military effort that will not achieve the desired outcome. Why is the U.S. policy consistently failing in Venezuela?
The policy is driven by what's called a naive obsession, the idea that removing one leader will automatically solve systemic problems.
A strategy that has repeatedly failed across history.
Iraq, Vietnam, Libya, the list goes on. The U.S. policy fundamentally ignores the on-the-ground reality in Venezuela, which is that President Maduro retains a crucial level of popular support.
Especially among the large, impoverished segment of the population.
The people who benefited from the social programs implemented under Chavez and continued under Maduro, the U.S. consistently downplays or just ignores this organic base of support.
So who are the opposition figures that the U.S. relies on?
They are often described in the material as artificial creations of the CIA. They lack genuine, widespread public backing or control over the essential state mechanisms like the military or the oil revenue.
So Maduro is not just an individual.
No, he's the head of a consolidated system and structure. Simply removing him will not change the underlying social dynamics or the military's control of resources.
And the fact that he continues to openly challenge the U.S.
and effectively laugh off the U.S. campaign, it just demonstrates the absolute futility of the current militarily focused approach. It burns resources without achieving any strategic objectives.
Okay, we turn now to the Pacific, the zone of the defining 21st century rivalry. China is continuing its military posture around Taiwan,
conducting its third major naval and air exercise,
designed specifically to rehearse a blockade of the island.
These exercises are not just symbolism, they are tactical responses, typically calibrated reactions to recent U.S. military aid packages or political visits to Taipei.
And the goal of the drills is to perfect the mechanisms of a total blockade.
A blockade, not necessarily an invasion. The goal is to demonstrate the capability to choke the island's economy at will.
But the broader strategic assessment is that China prefers a political solution to the Taiwan issue.
Right, noting China's historical aversion to expensive, high-casualty overseas conquests, their power play is designed to shift the balance of power so definitively that military action just becomes unnecessary.
And that power shift relies heavily on economic leverage. On that front, China is actively hardening its relationship with the West by limiting exports critical to U.S. industry.
This is economic warfare using supply chain dependence.
It is an intelligent application of leverage based on the West's failure to maintain self-sufficiency.
Right. China is limiting key exports that are essential for U.S. manufacturing. We're talking rare earth minerals.
which are crucial components for U.S. defense manufacturing.
Everything from guided missiles to advanced radar systems. And also silver, a key industrial resource used heavily in electronics and green energy infrastructure.
So this move forces the U.S. to scramble for increasingly expensive and scarce alternative supplies.
Which makes its domestic industrial base less competitive and its defense supply chain extremely vulnerable.
This dependence leads us into the critical race for the future, artificial intelligence. The analysis indicates China is taking the lead in AI development.
And the primary factor is not just software or talent. It is something far more fundamental.
Electricity.
The foundational requirement for leading the AI race is not silicon, it's electricity. AI models, training large language models, running massive data centers, they require exponentially growing amounts of power.
And the material states China's is taking the lead primarily because it possesses the electrical capacity needed to power these indispensable data centers.
While the U.S. is lagging behind, America faces an acute deficit in power generation capacity that analysts believe will persist for the next 5 to 10 years.
So, while the U.S. might be focusing on chip sanctions,
China is quietly building the underlying infrastructure, the power grid, that will ultimately determine who wins the AI supremacy race.
it's a structural disadvantage.
It is. A computer without power is a paperweight.
Right.
China's state-directed model allows for massive, fast expansion of energy generation, specifically targeted at this industrial requirement.
While the U.S. faces bureaucratic and regulatory hurdles that stall necessary power grid expansion.
Exactly.
This leads directly into what the reports call the most damning analysis concerning American power, the industrial crisis of the U.S. Navy.
Yes.
We often focus on the number of ships, but the structural problem is rooted in the collapse of the commercial shipbuilding sector.
This is a fundamental, almost existential crisis. You cannot have a strong, viable military navy without a strong, supporting commercial navy. It's impossible.
They rely on the same essential inputs.
Yeah. The same skilled labor welders, pipe fitters, machinists, the same complex supply chains, and the same specialized dry docks and manufacturing infrastructure.
And the U.S., in the pursuit of short-term cost efficiency after the Cold War, allowed its commercial shipbuilding industry to essentially collapse.
Assuming that specialized military yards would be sufficient. It was a fatal strategic miscalculation that has now undermined the entire naval force structure.
The numbers detailing this industrial abyss are truly staggering. We are talking about the 232-to-1 abyss. What exactly does that ratio signify?
That data point, derived from unclassified industrial reporting, it summarizes the disparity perfectly. For every 1 ton of steel the U.S. puts into the water, China puts 232 tons.
232.
Yes, and that's across both commercial and military sectors. China produces 50% of the world's commercial ships, container ships, tankers, bulk carriers, while the U.S. produces less than 1%.
So the U.S. Navy is currently an artisanal force.
Building warships slowly and expensively in isolated, segregated military yards, whereas China builds them on massive assembly lines integrated directly with their commercial sector, allowing for vast economies of scale.
This highlights the critical difference in their industrial models. The U.S. relies on a segregated military-industrial base that operates slowly, while China utilizes a civil-military fusion model. Can you elaborate on why that fusion model provides such immense surge capacity?
The fusion model is a masterstroke of industrial planning. In peacetime, Chinese shipyards build massive commercial container ships. This operation trains the labor force, it upgrades the equipment, and it generates massive profits.
And crucially, in a time of war,
The Chinese government can instantly convert those huge commercial yards, which are already structurally capable of handling massive hulls, into military production centers.
which provides immense surge capacity.
Immense, allowing them to rapidly produce massive numbers of ships, which is essential for fighting a protracted conflict. The U.S., operating in its isolated, walled garden of military shipyards, has zero surge capacity.
So we'd be forced to fight a war of attrition with only the ships we had available on day one.
Precisely. And the state of that existing fleet is deteriorating rapidly due to what the material calls a maintenance death spiral.
That's the immediate crisis.
It is. The lack of skilled civilian labor, dry docks, and industrial infrastructure has directly impacted fleet readiness. The analysis shows that nearly 40% of the U.S. attack submarine fleet.
Which is often cited as America's greatest advantage against China.
40% of that fleet is currently out of commission, sitting in dock awaiting repairs. These are not ships that can participate in a conflict, they are liabilities.
And the situation is so dire.
So humiliating that the U.S. is resorting to begging allies like South Korea and Japan, which still retain massive modern commercial shipbuilding capacity, to buy and manage American shipyards just to fix the existing fleet.
Wow.
The balance of power in the Pacific is shifting not due to a single battle, but structurally, hull by hull, because the U.S. forgot how to maintain the industrial base required to bend steel at scale.
So we've tracked the systemic cracks. The financial panic, the European collapse, and the U.S. military's industrial decline. Now let's look at the immense strain this convergence is putting on the United States itself.
Right.
The current military-first policy supporting Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan simultaneously is draining resources from a system that is already financially vulnerable.
This military overextension is occurring against a backdrop of unprecedented financial vulnerability. The national debt continues to grow rapidly, and the U.S. holds a staggering debt-to-GDP ratio of about 127%.
And the current political consensus in Washington, however, is based on what the reports term economic illusions and military power illusions.
A dangerous combination.
What exactly are those illusions, and why are they setting the U.S. up for failure in 2026?
Well, the economic illusion is the belief that the dollar's dominance is permanent, allowing deficits to be managed indefinitely without consequence.
And the military power illusion
is the belief that the U.S. retains undisputed global military superiority, even as its industrial base decays. And that military illusion was publicly and definitively shattered in 2025.
The failure to stop the Houthis in the Red Sea.
Yes. It demonstrated that the U.S. does not have the power, or more specifically, the resources and industrial depth it believes it has.
So if a regional, non-state actor can effectively neutralize global shipping lanes and successfully challenge the U.S. Navy.
For a sustained period, why should Washington assume that powers like China or Russia are less capable in their own theaters? The consensus among Washington elites is based on false premises. It ignores the reality of resource depletion and industrial decline.
This systemic failure, we learn, is profoundly amplified by a deep moral and political vacuum at the elite level,
leading to intense internal division.
Yes. The analysis suggests a dangerous feedback loop where political elites are actively pitting the populace against each other,
fomenting cultural and political division, specifically to distract from the failures of the state and the systemic economic collapses we've discussed.
And this behavior stems from an underlying attitude, often rooted in postmodernist rejection of universal morality,
where elites reject the existence of objective moral codes and often view the struggling working class as a mere burden or a problem to be managed.
So the primary political goal becomes maintaining power,
rather than fulfilling the social contract or addressing any of the structural issues.
This sounds less like modern political theory and more like a profound historical warning about societal failure.
It directly mirrors the historical warnings given to the ancient kingdom of Judah. The failure was not primarily military, it was moral and social.
The elites failed to care for the vulnerable.
They prioritized their own corrupt interests and rejected the core social technology, the unity, the trust, the common purpose required for societal cohesion.
And this societal degradation led to the loss of the internal stability needed to withstand external threats.
Exactly. When corrupt elites act blatantly in their own self-interest, the ability of the country to hold together and respond coherently to external pressure is just diminished.
So if the system is designed to reward this disconnect and failure, what is the path to fundamental structural change? Is simple political reform even possible?
Fundamental change, or reaching what is described as strategic equilibrium, it rarely happens through comfortable reform.
It only occurs when external and internal conditions deteriorate,
to the point where mass movements become necessary for people to simply survive and meet their basic needs. Right now, dissatisfaction is often expressed as, intellectual intrigue or partisan anger.
But when economic desperation forces large numbers of people into unified, nonpartisan action,
when the pension time bomb or the inflation crisis makes survival itself the primary motivation, that is the moment that breaks the power of the current political consensus.
the kind of structural transition.
A transition where elites are displaced or forced to change fundamentally. It is something we've not witnessed in this country since the depths of the Great Depression in the 1930s.
So we have completed our deep dive into the volatile global outlook for 2026. The systemic risks are converging at speed.
A frightening speed.
The petrodollar is actively being replaced by multilateral and digital alternatives built in Beijing. Europe's foundational industrial capacity, anchored by Germany, is collapsing due to self-inflicted wounds.
And the U.S. military is dangerously overstretched and industrially vulnerable, while confronting multiple rising powers in both the Middle East and the Pacific.
So if we synthesize this enormous body of information,
The crisis of American influence is rooted in two pillars: financial control and industrial capacity. The moment that financial architecture cracks,
exemplified by the $3 to $5 trillion pension risk,
and the emergence of alternatives like the digital yuan and BRICS trade, the moment that happens, political influence cracks with it.
as perfectly demonstrated by Canada's defiance.
Exactly. The critical lesson here is that the largest transfer of global economic power in modern history is happening not through devastating military invasions or revolutions.
But through patient structural investments.
In infrastructure, sophisticated loans, currency swap agreements, and the simple ability to bend steel at scale.
So you need to understand that this is not a temporary dip in the economic cycle that a quick interest rate cut will fix. It is structural. It is persistent.
The old assumption of automatic, unquestioned dollar dominance is over. The economic foundation of Western power is actively being undermined by superior industrial capacity and alternative financial plumbing being built elsewhere.
The wealth transfer that is happening is long-term and unavoidable.
And this raises an important question for you, the listener. Will historians ultimately look back and observe that the West lost its global economic dominance not through a devastating military defeat on the battlefield,
But because it was distracted.
distracted and preoccupied with internal ideological competition and political posturing, while its rivals quietly and efficiently built the enduring financial and industrial infrastructure of the future?
That is the structural reality you must navigate in the years ahead.